Stashed the tape in my grandfather's attic. The voice on the recording is older than I am. Recorded before I was born. I found it going through my grandfather's things after he passed. A shoebox in the attic labeled in his handwriting with nothing but a date, 11 years before I was born, and a cassette tape inside, unmarked otherwise. I almost didn't play it. I want to say that now, at the start, because I think about it more than anything else in this whole story. The version of this where I simply didn't have a working tape deck in the house. And never went looking for one. I did have one. An old boombox in the garage nobody had used in a decade. I sat down on a Tuesday evening, alone in my grandfather's empty house while my family handled the estate paperwork elsewhere. And I played. Then the recording opens with a long stretch of tape hiss. Painting silhouettes. Clearly older. He doesn't introduce himself. He says, almost mid-thought, as if continuing a conversation rather than starting one. If you're listening to this, you're old enough now to understand what I couldn't explain when you were small. I'm sorry I can't tell you this in person. By the time you hear it, I probably won't be able to. I sat with that for a while, before I understood what was strange about it. Beyond the obvious, the voice was addressing someone directly. A you, in the intimate, specific way a parent talks to a child. And the date on the box was 11 years before I existed. I checked, more than once, whether the voice was my grandfather's. It wasn't. I'd know his voice anywhere. This was someone else, a stranger to me, speaking with the same worn, apologetic cadence. In a recording my grandfather had kept, unlabeled except for a date, hidden in an attic for what would have been at least 3 decades by the time I found it. The rest of the tape, maybe 20 minutes total, is difficult to describe cleanly because the man never says anything a listener could act on directly. He talks around something rather than about it, mentions the thing that comes back every 3rd generation, mentions the mistake I made trying to explain it to your mother, too late, mentions near the end. A phrase that made me sit forward on the phrase, that made me sit forward on the garage floor, with my heart going faster than the moment seemed to warrant. You'll find a tape of your own to make, eventually. You'll know when. I wish I could tell you. It gets easier to know what to say. I turned it off there. I didn't finish it that night. I asked my mother about it a few days later, carefully, without explaining exactly what I'd found, framing it as a question about my grandfather's side of the family, whether anyone had ever mentioned old recordings, family traditions involving tape, anything like that. She went quiet, in a way I recognized from childhood, the specific quiet she used whenever a topic touched something she decided long ago not to discuss. Eventually, she said that her own father, my great-grandfather, had left something similar for my grandfather years before she was born, and that her father had never let her hear the whole thing, only ever describing it as something he'd rather he not have to carry sooner than necessary. She said my grandfather had told her once that he intended to leave something of his own eventually. She'd assumed, given his sudden decline, that he never got the chance. I didn't tell her I'd already heard it. I don't fully know why I didn't. I think some part of me had already started treating the tape as something private between me and whoever the voice belonged to, which is a strange thing to feel about a recording made before I existed. I want to describe what happened over the following weeks carefully, because I've gone back and forth on how much of it was genuinely strange and how much was me, alone, in a dead man's house, primed by an unsettling recording to notice patterns, that unsettling recording to notice weren't really there. I started sleeping in my grandfather's house while helping settle the estate, and more than once, late at night, I heard what I can only describe as tape hiss. The exact texture of it, that specific analog static, coming faintly from somewhere in the house. Never loud enough to locate, always stopping the moment I got up to look for its source. I checked the boombox each time. It was off. The tape wasn't in it. I also started noticing, without meaning to, that I could recall details from the recording with a clarity that felt wrong, or something I'd only listened to once. Not the words exactly, but the cadence. The specific worn quality of the voice. I'd heard it many more times than I actually had, as if something about hearing it once had lodged it somewhere deeper than memory usually allows. I played the tape again, fully this time, 3 weeks later, mostly to prove to myself I could listen to the whole thing without anything happening. The ending is the part I hadn't gotten to the first time, and it's the part that made me finally understand what I was actually holding. Then, near the very end, after another long stretch of hiss, the man's voice returns, quieter, and says something that isn't addressed to a generic future listener anymore. It uses a name. Not mine. A name I didn't recognize at all. And it took me a full day of quiet, obsessive research through old family records to place it. It was my grandfather's name, the one he'd apparently gone by briefly, as a very young child, before a family and child. Ove led to him using his middle name instead, a detail so minor that even my mother had forgotten it until I brought it up and watched her go pale. The ring wasn't addressed to me. It had never been addressed to me. It was a father's message to his own son, my grandfather, made when my grandfather was a child too young to understand it, meant to be found decades later when he was old enough. My grandfather had kept it, unplayed or unexplained to his own daughter, and passed to him, not by handing it over directly, but by simply keeping it somewhere. It would eventually be found, which meant the tape I'd found wasn't the message left for me at all. It was the message left for my grandfather, 30 years too late for him to ever properly answer it. still sitting exactly where he'd left it, because he'd never gotten the chance to record his own version and place it somewhere for me to find. When I was old enough, I understood. Sitting there on the garage floor, a second time, why the tape kept finding its way into empty rooms of that house at night. It wasn't a haunting in the way I'd been quietly assuming. It was closer to an obligation left unfinished, a message meant to be answered with another message, generation after generation, that had simply skipped a beat because my grandfather ran out of time before he could make his. I bought a blank cassette a week after the funeral. I haven't recorded anything onto it yet. I've sat in front of the boombox several times with it loaded, finger on the button. And each time I found, I don't yet know what I'm supposed to say. Haunted me about. I wish I could tell you it gets easier to know what to say. I don't have children. I don't know yet who this tape is even for, or how many years I have before it needs to exist. I've started to understand that this is not a question I get to answer on my own schedule. I think someday, without fully choosing it, I'll know when it's time to sit down and start talking into an empty cassette, addressing someone who doesn't exist yet about something I still don't fully understand myself. Put the box back in my own attic, this time with both tapes inside it. The one I inherited, the blank one waiting beside it. I haven't decided yet whether that was an act of respect or the first real sign that whatever this is has already started working on me the same patient way it worked on every version of my family before.